How are you today?
Good, man. How about you?
Oh man, it's crazy busy, man. Because I'm planning this film shoot. I've been working on a feature film now for going on 2 years, and I've had so much drama off screen with some of the actors, and I'm trying to get the last scenes filmed. And this weekend is the weekend we're gonna do like this is it. This is a wrap after this. But it's just there's so much, and I hope that we can maybe get into that because
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
there's a lot of drama that happens behind, off screen that people don't realize a lot of times.
Is that just one project you're working on right now?
Oh no, God! I wish it was just one project. If that was the case, I'd be done with it. But I have so many different projects I'm working on simultaneously. I think some take precedence over the others because of the people that are involved. It's like, for example, I'm working on this documentary that it's being the executive producer, and it focuses on Capadonna, who's a member of the Wu-Tang Clan, and that takes up a bulk of my time because the director is constantly, checking with me on. We have to do these edits, and we have to do them on Zoom, or
I thought you were the director.
not on that project.
No,
I'm
okay.
I'm an assistant director. I'm not
I
the director.
yeah.
I do have a lot of input, but I'm not friends with Capadonna, so it was somebody
How many
else.
how many projects you got going on right now total?
Three.
Three?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one is the big one. My feature is the second one, and then I'm doing another film project with another co-director. So there's all that going on too that simultaneously is happening in pieces here, pieces there. But Capadonna takes a lot of my time.
All right. You know what? Let's
Yeah.
start off with that feature film. Tell me about it.
Oh, okay. So this actually plays. We can actually do where we come back around because the
Okay.
feature that I'm working on is based on the podcast, the fiction podcast that I wrote, and it's called The Rise of King Asilas. Now, this podcast ran for 6 seasons, right? It was pretty popular and it was controversial because the story is about America changing from a democracy to a monarchy. So essentially, the one party rule decided that we're just going to switch democracy and switch it out for a authoritarian figure, if you will. And so this was in 2017. So it was right after Trump got elected the first time. And there was all kinds of uproar. The people in the audio drama community were constantly like, I wouldn't say attacking me, but they were having very colorful conversations, we'll say. And that
And
they
a
were
field
trying
day on you.
they were trying to make comparisons between the storyline and what was happening in US politics. And so I had to really jump into these Reddit threads and kind of set the record straight, which was awkward and uncomfortable because, as if you've ever ventured into Reddit, it is shark infested waters times 10. It's really hard to navigate these conversations that come at you from all angles. And essentially I had to defend the podcast because I had to remind everyone that it's a work of fiction. And when you're dealing with fiction, everything is a make believe, and so they took things a little too seriously, I think. But as time went on, I realized that there were people coming and sending me emails, and other podcasters were having me on their show to talk about some of the events that were in the show that seemed to have prophetic elements, and that they were coming true in some ways, and they were trying to piece this conspiracy together, and they were trying to pick my brain as to how I had foresight into these things happening, which I just picked up my pen and went. It wasn't. I think because I remember we corresponded earlier. We talked about the art of storytelling, right? And so storytelling in itself is an art form, right? But good storytelling requires some discipline, if you think about it. So you like, for example, you got to know when to pause. You got to know when to deliver something, and you want to have the most impact at the most opportune times as a storyteller. And in this particular podcast that I'm referring to, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of stories within the general storyline. So it's not even just a story; it is a world. He said it's a difference between storytelling and world building. In the case of King Asilas, we're dealing with a world building situation where it's, it's massive. The amount of stories that are subplots, if you will, because there's all these people around the king and there's all these motives surrounding the king that ultimately leads him to want to conquer the entire world. And there's all this, global conflict. And it's a fascinating story. I think it's one that I've only collaborated on with a very handful of people. It's different than when you talk about like storytelling on television or in movies or in Hollywood, where they have teams of writers and they get together and they're bouncing all these ideas and they're trying different disciplines to elicit certain responses from the audiences, right? When you think about Hollywood blockbuster films, they're always going for certain responses. They're trying to get the audience to react a certain way. They push certain buttons to get you to, trigger in a certain way. And it's very methodical, it's very meticulous, and it's very intentional, right? I think with more organic storytelling, which is what I tried to do with King Asilas, because I modeled it after some of the great writers of history. I'm a literature major from the university. That was what I studied, and I marveled at all the great writers, and particularly I was a huge fan of Shakespeare, of course. Excuse me. And Shakespeare had a certain way of delivering things satirically with comedic value that was impactful, that has stood the test of time. Centuries later, we're still talking and analyzing his work. That's a real testament to a fantastic storyteller.
Walk me through that discipline again. So you said knowing when to pause, knowing what to do when. Isn't that just effective storytelling?
In some ways, yeah. But, if you're a disciplined enough writer, you'll know when to do it. Like, for example, if there's a situation like, okay, I'll give you an example from the podcast that I'm telling you about, the King Asilas story. Okay, so there's this story of this young couple. They want to get married, right? And so they're going, because in this story, the king allows any person to register there at the castle to have their weddings there for free. Like, you don't have to pay. You just sign up and you can have your big wedding at the big gardens that the king has, right? So they're a young couple. They probably don't have any money. And so they go there, they register and they want to have their wedding. But, all these series of events happen. There's a big tornado that hits, it tears up the garden, right? And so now the girl is heartbroken because she can't have her wedding in the gardens. And so, so then they have to move their idea somewhere else. But that is an effect of, the global calamities that are happening, because it's not just the king's actions that are taking place, and there are global environmental things happening. There's tornadoes, there's earthquakes, there's volcanoes. I think Yellowstone erupts. There's all this crazy calamities that are happening, and so all of those are affecting this young couple. Eventually, they do get married, right? And their honeymoon is disrupted because there's basically warlords taking over the South, where I think they were in the Carolinas or something. The king loses control of that section of the country, and so now there's all these warlords, and there's cannibals too. And so, like, there's all these things that are happening, and you can't help but feel sorry for this couple, because all they want to do is be left alone and be happy, and they are not allowed to. And so I think when you pace it a certain way, so you give them just enough happiness, you give them just enough comfort, and they're like, hey, look, we're here, we're alive, and we're doing all this thing, and then all of a sudden there's a horde of cannibals chasing them. So it's really a matter of when to hit them with these things. And it can't always be like, I really hate these stories, like when you watch a movie and it's the very first scene, there's somebody being chased down the hall, down the a hallway or an alley, and they're getting killed and plummeted. Then you have to go back and figure out how they got there. For me, it's always like, if you do these things incrementally, and that's what I meant by the discipline. It's like, you got to know when to release these things, when to let the audience know this happens, and then you eventually reach your conclusion.
Right. You're basically you're toying with the feelings of the audience,
keeping them along,
a better reaction, right?
Bringing them in, reeling them in, one tug at a time, because that's how you keep them for the long term. That's how people who started the series finished the series. because they wanted to know what happened. How did this end? How did this end for the king? How did it end for this couple? How did it end for these other people? And so that's what I mean by discipline. It's really a matter of knowing when to have your characters act out the events that'll keep your audience on edge.
Do you think the audience loses interest fast?
It depends on I think with this particular series, it really depends on their political points of view.
I think in general of most films.
Well, I mean, think about it. It depends on what their interests are. I think for the most part, people, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, or if you're young or you're old, relationships especially are what keep people engaged and keep people interested in the story. It's the relationship that your characters have with each other, or the relationship that they have with whatever the problem is, or whatever their counterpart is, whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish that's in the way. Those are the relationships that they have are really what keeps people engaged.
So the audience, basically, you take yourself and you relate yourself to somebody in the film who's kind of going through something.
Maybe. I mean, I think I was watching a series on Netflix, and it's based on a true story. It was about a young Asian girl who was adopted by a Spanish couple in Spain, and she was murdered, right? And so immediately the press and the authorities, blamed the parents, and so they put the parents in jail. So it plays out all these things, and so you can't help but think of like, okay, well, did they do it or did they not do it? And so I think you get invested in it as much as you relate to them in some ways. Like I try to put myself in that situation. God forbid I ever am. But, it's more a matter of like that series triggered so many conversations between me and my wife at the dinner table, about just in general of what we have to be grateful for. But, I think, I don't think usually we watch a film or something like that with the idea that, let me insert myself into this story. It's more of like trying to analyze the story and bring up conversation either with yourself or with somebody else.
So you watch the story, you kind of analyze it. Is everyone pro into that deep analysis? Is that can't movies just be for entertainment?
Oh yeah. I think at the surface level, most of us just want to be entertained. And certainly this story that I was referring to is very entertaining because it keeps you on edge. It's whatever gets the endorphins flowing in your mind, your brain. For some people, it's horror. For some people, it's erotic stuff. For some people, it's sci-fi, aliens. I get into that sort of thing. I think for me to get the endorphins pumping in my mind, it's really like these conspiracy story type movies, who done it, and I especially like sci-fi, like anything with like alien invasions and like cataclysmic events, end of world apocalyptic stuff. That really gets the endorphins flowing in my head. So it's really a matter of the individual. That's why you have so many genres.
Right. I'm not here for a message. I'm here for a dopamine release.
That's it. That's why we go on social media, right? Every time we see those likes, boy, it doesn't last though. It's like I tell my son, and I tell this to my students because as a teacher, I tell my students, I go, it doesn't last. It's like any drug, whether it's alcohol or some other drug, it doesn't last. It wears off. And so
why would you keep going then? If it's temporary.
Well, that's why they have whole categories on Hulu and Netflix. And you just go one after the other because you just want to keep hitting those dopamines,
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh. I want to talk about give me some effective storytelling. Like how does one do that?
Effective storytelling?
Effective storytelling. So we talked about the discipline part. What about the rest of it?
Well, I mean, it depends on the platform you're using. If it's just raw, straight story, like you're just reading a book, right? If that's what it is, it has to have strong imagery. If you're not going to provide the imagery through, the visuals, like on a TV show, for example, then you have to provide those visuals in the text. Like when you're writing, you have to describe this landscape. You have to do a lot of character building because an audience, a reader is going to want to know as much as they can about what's going on and who's involved.
And that also applies to just conversational style.
Absolutely. I mean, I do that, in fact, with a novel that I wrote based on, the stories. That's how I started off the story. I started off the novel with a dialogue. It's like, there are people that are talking, and I'm giving you some exposition and then going right into the conversation, because that's going to tell the story. That the action is what's going to get you involved in the story. It's like, what is this? Where is this going? And so you just want to keep consuming it. That's when you can do that. And, I always tell people, especially the writers, people who want to be better writers, you have to read the best of the best. You have to discipline yourself and set aside time and read the best writers that there are. And that's debatable, about who you find. To me, Michael Crichton was one of the best writers ever. He passed away, I don't know, about 10 years ago or something like that. He's the guy who wrote Jurassic Park, because talk about visual, talk about creative imagination. That's what I'm talking about. And he wasn't a complex writer either. It's pretty standard stuff in terms of like complexity. I mean, because you can get lost in you can get lost in some of these writers that they'll wrap your brain into a pretzel with all their complex language. It really depends on, again, if you're reading this and it's getting you stimulated in the brain. I try to emulate them. That's what I do. I love Michael Crichton. That's one of my favorites of the more modern contemporary writers.
I always love. I'm big on twists, man. Whether I'm reading or I'm watching a TV show. If there's a twist in there every like 1 or 2 episodes, I'm hooked. Yes. I need a twist to keep me going.
Yes, right. I started. Yeah, it's because then it opens up the possibilities of okay, well, what else could be a twist? What else is creeping around the corner that I'm going to discover here in a few minutes?
Yeah, it gives me some time to use my own creativity.
Absolutely.
I can imagine until something happens and I know what for sure happened, but there's still that air of possibility there.
Sure. I mean, so go on.
No, I was just gonna go on to the next thing. I was like, so we established imagery. You set the scene, or you describe what's happening. What's next?
Well, you got to give them action. You got to give them a problem. There's got to be there has to be a situation that needs to be resolved. I think there's nothing that turns me off more when I'm reading a book and I have to go in 2 chapters to figure out what the problem is. You need to let them know right away in the first few pages, if not the first page.
What about when you said, the first thing you see is main character getting chased down, whatever, and then killed or whatever. Yeah, that works.
That's just a preference of mine that I don't particularly care for it. But I'm not saying it's not effective. Clearly, there's tons of stories that are just like that. It's an effective way to get people hooked because they want to know what happened. This is why I think the Law and Order was such a long-standing television show, because it always starts with the dead body. And the cops showing up saying, "Hey, what happened to this guy?" They always make some like quirky remark, and then you're like, "What? Well, how did this guy die?" So then you go back and you investigate it. Retrofitting everything, figuring out how it worked, how it happened.
Yeah. Are there different styles to storytelling, or? Yeah, imagine there have to be.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of Quentin Tarantino. Here's a guy who is just as offbeat as you're gonna get in a very brash way, and you gotta admire that. I as a director, I love Quentin Tarantino. I love his films. I love how he tells the story fragmentally.
Yeah.
And sometimes times get jumped around, so it can. If you're a casual moviegoer, you might get confused, but I think if you're an astute thinker and just a half, hey, I've seen this before, you will like the imagery that he presents. You will like the vibes and the way the characters interact with each other. I think for the fragmented way of telling a story is you talking about going back to that idea of discipline, you really got to know what you're doing, because you're going to confuse your audience if you don't.
Wasn't Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was that his?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that one did jump around chronologically. Maybe not as
And
much
it was
as I
long,
remember.
as I remember. It was pretty
It
darn
was long, yeah.
long.
I remember I was just sitting there, and there the characters he represented in there would be, he was representing real people back in the
Yeah,
day, and I'd be like, I don't know who any of these people are, and as you go back and search,
yeah, yeah, no doubt. Kill Bill's another one that I love. You know,
Kill Bill,
can't get.
Django.
Yeah, I was just talking to a buddy of mine out there who's actually just moved out to Hollywood. We were talking about that. He's actually back in town. I'm going to be seeing him soon. I wish him the best out there in Hollywood. It is another world, man. I will not be moving out there. That's for sure.
No Hollywood in your future?
Nah, I'm not.
Why
a
not?
Hollywood guy. Because I'm not willing to sell my soul to the devil. That's why I'm not willing to drink blood. Okay.
Yeah, dude. Besides that, what is it about the film industry that most people don't know?
It's very perverted. There's a lot of perversions in it. You know, I think a lot of that's actually starting to come to light. I mean, if you remember the whole Weinstein thing, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know,
Weinstein, what is that? I didn't hear about
Harvey Weinstein and his casting couch scandal, where he was sleeping with all the girls until he finally got arrested and put in prison.
Yes.
So I'm just saying, like, you know, that there's a lot of that, you know, and the P. Diddy thing. I don't know if you heard about that, how he was having his little clubs in the basement of his mansion.
There was also that point where Mel Gibson came out and said something.
Oh, Mel Gibson, yeah.
Yeah. A little whistleblower.
Oh, there's been more of them, you know, as of late.
There's a lot. There's also the part where, yeah, like you said, with the little children's shows on Disney and everything, that stuff's starting to come to light.
Yeah, there's a lot of pedophilia out there. And it's that, and I just don't like the vibe. I've been out there. Now, don't get me wrong, I have been there, and it's just not my scene, man. This is not my thing.
You're not into kids.
No, I'm not willing to sell my soul to the devil. I'm not doing it.
I'm not drinking my spouse's blood. I'm good. I'm not drinking Megan Fox.
not sacrificing family members. Sorry, not doing it.
Yeah. What was that? That was Kanye.
Yeah. I know we laugh about it, but there's probably
so
a lot of truth.
I think it's true. I think it was something about Trudeau too. Justin Trudeau apparently he sacrificed his brother. Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we're kind of jokingly, but not jokingly. It's like it really is. It's a true thing, man. It really is.
I don't want you to get canceled this early.
It's like, don't worry, Ashwin, because man, let me tell you, I've been marked already.
I'm good. We're fine.
Don't worry, it's all on me. It can fall on me, Ashwin. Don't worry about that.
I'll gladly take half the credit on that one.
Okay. So like, hey man, like, who are these guys?
Yeah.
No, anybody who watches me and watches my show. And by the way, I can't wait to have you on my show. We'll talk about that later. But that's one of the things. Like, I don't care, man. I'm gonna go at the jugular because that's how I am. I think that translates. I mean, or should I say that is reflected, I think, a lot in my work. I'd be lying if I say there wasn't some of my personality in the character of the king in the show. Only because, I mean, there's certain fantasies you get to play out, I guess, when you're writing. You know, when you're telling a story, you get to play out some of the things you fantasize about, you know, in your characters. And so I think that's when you can really have fun in the storytelling process as a writer. Or even as a director, you know, that when you're putting together your scripts and you're putting your story together and these characters, the dialogue and all that good stuff, you can really kind of put in stuff that you truly want to get out. I think that's one of the things about writers is we have so much inside that we need to get out. For whatever reasons, we're compelled to do it. And it's like this, and it's really not a writing related thing, but I think it does kind of relate in the discipline of writing. And that's the story that Billy Joel said once. So Billy Joel was in an interview, right? And the interviewer asked him, "When did you decide to play the piano, right? When did you decide to choose? Why did you choose to play the piano of all the instruments? And he says, I don't think I chose the piano. I think the piano chose me. And I really think that concept for me is how I got here as a storyteller, as a writer, as a podcaster, as a YouTuber or whatever. I didn't choose those things. They selected me and I'm compelled to do it. Does that make any sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I think I say this a lot, but people underestimate how much control they have over things. So when you say, well, this chose you and you didn't chose it, man, it's like saying the universe chose you for this one thing and you just had no play in it. Or are you saying it's an inborn nature? Like, you're sitting here with me, but this is like an inborn thing that podcasting chose you or film chose you.
Oh, well, I mean, part of it is just figuring out what you're good at too. I mean, you could be 7 feet tall, and if you're not trying out for basketball, what are you going to do? You're going to play duck bowling or something? I mean, come on. Guys who are 4'5" can't be basketball players usually. I mean, it would take a miracle. So if you're good at something, like for me, I think ever since I was a little boy, I asked my mom to get me a blank, notebook and some pencils and a pen, and I would just go at it and just write poetry and write dumb stuff, But it was just the routine of it, because I felt that I just needed to write. I just couldn't help
that's
myself.
another thing. We're doing this for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, doing it to express yourself. There was this I forgot his name, but this YouTuber, he did one podcast. He's not a podcaster, but he did one podcast. And he said, whatever you speak about, do it for yourself, and like don't keep your audience in mind. Like maybe in my first few episodes I wouldn't say something, just keeping my audience in mind. But after that, I was like, well, it is my show. It's a way of me expressing my ideas. So I'm going to express myself,
Sure. And I think at this level, it's not like I have, some big Hollywood studio telling me, hey, your numbers are bad this time. You got, I don't have that weighing over me, And honestly, I think if I was working under a situation like that, I wouldn't feel that it was fun. I wouldn't feel like all my creative juices are flowing. I would feel like, oh man, I got to do this because XYZ studio executive wants me to XYZ, and I'm like, it's like a job. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my job as a teacher. I don't always agree with administrative aspects of that, but I wouldn't trade it. I think it's one of those things that it's part career and part contribution to the world, because we have such a strange, complex world that these young people are growing up in. And so they're trying to navigate and trying to make sense of it. And you got to have adults in the room that aren't insane. And so, and I'm not poking at my colleagues here or the profession, but there's a lot of insanity, and a lot of it is administratively doled out. And I think I have to kind of be that what stands between total indoctrination and learning what you need to learn academically, so you'll be prepared when you get to college, etc. Life,
We're talking about the school agendas these days.
Exactly. You can't help those things. It's out of my arena. I don't have any real say in that. I mean, I get collectively, with unions, but even that's becoming very diluted. I think you don't really have a lot of voices willing to stand out. You have too many voices that want to team up. And I think that when you don't have any real discussion or debate about the issues, you end up getting controlled. You end up getting pushed into a box. Nobody likes being in a box, man. At least I don't.
Well, it's just common sense. I mean, why are they teaching kids about, certain things? Should be teaching kids how to go to the next grade, how to do math and things, not sexuality and like all this stuff, man. Like kids don't need to know about that early. There's no point.
No,
Like
and
you
you know,
said, that's indoctrination at that point. It's
yeah,
ridiculous.
it doesn't happen in my classroom. I can assure you of that. I am
Yeah,
vehemently against that sort of thing. I'm there to teach these kids how to read and write, and that's what I'm going to do, come hell or high water.
exactly. There's a difference between accepting someone for who they are and pushing children into a certain mindset they haven't adopted yet or doesn't naturally occur to them.
You know something, and this actually plays into our theme because it affects storytelling. You know, it influences it, you know, negatively or however you want to view it. In my case, it had a huge impact, but it didn't change. I was never going to change the storyline. And even so, I think there were elements of the story that I let play out only because I thought creatively it worked. Like, for example, the king fell in love with a lesbian. He fell in love with a woman who was a lesbian, right? And so, like,
Poor guy.
you know, and he was, you know, the queen was like, "You're in love with her," blah blah blah, and there's all this drama, and he's like, "Whoa, hold on a second," and she left her wife, right? She got divorced from her wife and got with the king.
She's a lesbian.
Not anymore. I guess she was bisexual. So like that element of it played into the story. So people were telling me, "Oh, you know, you're getting woke." I'm like, "No, dude.
No, JB, not you. No.
think of the value of this story." He goes, "No." I'm like, listen to the story. It plays out well, I thought. And so I didn't do it to placate. I certainly didn't do it to make anybody, you know, want to listen to my show who were on that side, because they stopped listening a long time ago. They're like, they're not coming back. So it was more of a matter of like, hey, I think this makes for a great story. You know, I mean, how many of us guys, alpha males, haven't thought that? They're like, you know, well, she hasn't been with a real man before. If she were with me, I'd make her change her mind. Blah blah blah. It was more along that line, and so I think it kind of had an opposite effect, because then it made people even angrier with me instead of being like, oh, you're not trying to, you're trying to. This is a machismo thing going on. I'm like, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You be the judge. Yeah.
I mean,
And
you're
so,
putting the story out there.
You're talking about earlier about pushing those buttons and getting the reactions from people. You know, I think for 6 seasons it worked, because every time I put out episodes and every time I put out a season, you have people coming at me from all angles. And I do mean all angles. I remember getting an email from a guy who swore he understood where I was coming from, and I couldn't make sense of the gibberish that he was. It was like a book, like all the intricacies and the conspiracies and the lizard people and blah 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 blah. I know what you meant by this, and I know what you meant by that. And it was kind of creepy, man. But and in some ways, and somewhere deep down inside, I was laughing hysterically, and at the same time feeling a bit proud that someone took that much time into it.
I was able to produce something that was so effective that someone really analyzed it to the root and not only went out of their way to give me a response.
You know what? I think the strangest thing was I got a call from somebody, and he asked me if I was a member of the Masons.
Freemasons.
Yeah. I'm like, no. Why would you think I'm a member of the Masons? He goes,
if I was, I'd be pushing woke agenda.
Well, you're a little too close to comfort there, guy. I'm like, seriously? Oh man. I think I did my homework too well. Yeah.
Jamie, would you ever go woke?
No.
No?
I'm not woke. I'm not. Look, I'm a free speech guy. You know, I'm an independent. I don't belong to any political party. I was a member of the Democratic Party for most of my adult life. And then I just said, you know what? I don't want to be a part of any of this stuff. I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be an independent. And if you want me to vote for you or whatever, sell me on the idea, and then I'll vote for you. And so I have voted for both parties, and I will continue to do so. I've even voted for independent parties. I even voted for a Green Party once. So you sell me on the idea, and I'll vote for you. That's how I view it. And I'm not signed into anybody right now.
Yeah. You signed into yourself.
Yep. Because, right. You know, and I live in Maryland, which is a very blue state. And we had a Republican governor for 2 terms, and he was a very popular governor. In fact, He was probably the most popular governor in the country. And think about this. He was a Republican in a Democrat, deep blue state. Unbelievable.
And that played out well. That
played out really well because he knew what he was doing. Like he said all the right things, and he did all the right things, at least for the most part. And hey, when a guy's got the good ideas, or the woman has a good idea, that's what you got to run with. Just like the stories, man.
I have to ask you, what made you leave the Democratic Party, but not join Republican, but become independent? Like, what is it about the Democrats?
I'm Catholic. I'm Catholic, and there's a lot of things that my religion doesn't allow me to believe in, and so I don't believe in those things, and I'm not going to turn my back on my religious beliefs. And so I thought the Democratic Party had really not given any thought as to who they were offending or their lack of empathy for religious freedoms and religious people, especially those of us that are Christian. And so I said, you know what? If you don't value my Christian beliefs, then I can't be a part of this.
Do you think religion is demonized in America?
Oh, yes. I mean, look what happened at the Olympics. They had that whole
dude, it's ridiculous.
I mean, they made a mockery of the Last Supper. I mean, I was completely and utterly offended. And so were billions of other Christians around the world.
Yeah. Not just Christians, everybody. It was a gross display of wokeness at its finest.
I mean, I try not to get too personal into these kinds of things when people have conversations with me about it, but it's like look, I'm not saying I'm a saint. I didn't live a saintly life. I think as a musician for many years, I think I did everything the opposite of what saintly is for decades. But I had my Jesus moment, okay? And so I realized that what I was doing was wrong, and I had to change my ways. And my wife is very happy that I did, and here I am.
There you go.
So everybody has to find their peace somehow. I'm not suggesting everybody do that. I mean, I would say that as just to preach the word, but I know not everyone's going to listen, and so I'm not going to force it on them.
Everybody is capable of independent thought, right?
Absolutely. If you have your own come to Jesus moment, so be it. I'm not judging. It says it right there, man. Don't judge, lest be judged yourself.
Yeah, I know we went off on a massive tangent.
We went completely off topic. Talk about storytelling, man. Biblical storytelling. No. We can tie it back in, and I'll tell you how. Because the story that I was telling you about, the Rise of King Asilas, has a lot of biblical inferences in it. In fact, there's the whole 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in it. He is essentially considered an antichrist. I mean, the last season is they have the big battle at Armageddon. So there's a lot of biblical references in it. In fact, there was a story of the 2 sons, right? I'll share this with you real quick because I remember I got a lot of flack from some listeners. They're like, this part of the story is silly. I don't know why you did it. And they were like criticizing me for the story, right? Until I explained what it was. And maybe when I tell you the story, you'll know what it is, maybe. So the king has 2 sons, Isaac and Jacob, right? Isaac's the older son. So Jacob one day he's eating his soup. He's going to eat the soup. He's prepared this soup and he's about to eat it, right? And the older brother walks in. He's like drunk or whatever. He's like, hey, give me some of your soup. And he's like, yeah, no, I'm not giving you any of this soup. He goes, why not? And he goes, because this is my soup. He goes, you're supposed to share everything, man. He's like, no, man, I'm not being greedy. The kitchen's full of food, man. The chef will make you whatever you want. But this is my soup. And I'm going to eat it, right? And so the brother's like, well, how about we trade something for it? He goes, I don't want to trade with you. You don't have anything I want. He goes, oh, sure. There's got to be something I want. There's got to be something I want that you really want. And let's trade. So he goes, all right, trade me your birthright. And he's like, what? Your birthright. I'll give you my bowl of soup and you give me your birthright. This way I'll be next in line for the king to be king, right? And he's like, whatever, man. Sure. Okay. Give me the soup. Right. And he didn't think anything of it. But then the younger son goes and tells his father, look, Isaac traded his birthright to me for a bowl of soup, right? And so he's like, really? And he's like, and so he accepted the terms of this, right? And so people were like, why did you tell this? This is so stupid. I'm like, you guys don't really get it, man. This is straight out of the Bible. Even the names of the children. I think it was David's sons, Isaac and Jacob. And that's exactly what happened in the Bible. He traded his birthright for a bowl of soup. It's in the Bible. It's actual. I plagiarized the Bible.
Yeah.
So going back to the art of storytelling, it's okay to borrow from things that are in the public domain. There's already the stories there that are public domain. You can grab it. You can make an adaptation of it. Just put it in your book or put it in your story. Put it in your show. Put it in your podcast because it's public domain.
Yeah, property.
I think a lot of absolutely. I mean, even Shakespeare is public domain. So I don't know. Is that considered plagiarism? Tell me. You tell me. Is that considered plagiarism?
That's a gray area, man. Well, if it's public domain, then no. But if it's a private piece of work, then yes. I feel like plagiarism is a new concept, very modern.
Right, because the Bible doesn't have an author.
Exactly.
It has several, as far as we can tell. So who actually wrote that story is anyone's guess.
Well, the question is anyone going to come and sue you? Who, the Vatican? Is the Vatican going to come and, cease and desist on your front door?
I don't think the Pope wants us to go into discovery. Oh man, that was
that ever happens. That's funny.
That was a really bad joke. But anyway, dude, yeah. So storytelling is an art form, as I said. It does require discipline, and sometimes you can borrow and plagiarize the Bible.
Some things from the Bible, yeah. Spice it up a bit.
Why not, man? Let me tell you, there's some really creepy stuff in the Bible, man. Especially as I was reading Revelations, because I had read it, but when I was reading to do the last season of the show, I mean, I really read it from start to finish, and man, it is creepy as heck, man. It is wild. It is so like dark. So I was able to pull some of that for just like it was inspiration, I think, for that last episode. I think the last episode is from what people tell me, the last episode is probably the best. But in order to really appreciate it, you have to listen to the previous 89 episodes.
I feel like when it comes to religious texts, you can either take it at face value, and then there's the other half that go deeper. Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, there's been all kinds of modern adaptations of biblical stories.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a fan of some of them. Don't get me wrong. I like a lot of people watch the Passion of the Christ, for example. It's brutal, man. Whether you believe in Jesus or not. I mean, if you watch that film, it is absolutely brutal. I can't it makes me even now wince to think of it. The brutality of it. It's like, wow. Whew, man.
There's the one question I ask all my guests, JB.
Sure.
What are your words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. Oh, man. Oh, words of wisdom to writers, to storytellers.
That's a good reference is yourself a few years ago or whenever you started. Someone that is in your position, but back in the day.
When you do things that you enjoy, when you want to do things because you're compelled to, because you feel you need to, try to have as much fun as you can doing it. Because, whether you're getting paid for the project or not, whether you're getting paid for the book or not, whether you're aspired for it to be a bestseller or a film to be, to win the awards at some film festival or whatever. Because, I mean, I do that with the intention of leaving something that is a piece of me, but when we go off air, I'll share a couple of movies that I did, short films with you, that I'm particularly proud of, like long after I'm gone. Do it for the people that are going to enjoy it long after you're gone. I've often
That's
said
a
that.
legacy, right? Do it for your
Yeah, I mean,
legacy.
do it for the long haul. Don't do it for the short term. Don't do it for the now because we got to get a certain amount of hits and I'll make this much money or blah blah. If you do it for that reason, then it'll die soon. It'll die a quick death, you know. But if you do it because it's something in your heart and you want to leave something behind long after you're buried or cremated, have so much fun doing it, man, because life is short, and it's going to be over before you know it. Right. I'm 53 as I'm talking to you now, and I remember being 21, 22 years old, just thinking, man, I just want to get drunk and partying and having good times. But you reach this age, you're like, uh-oh, like I'm 7 years away from 60, bro. So everything I do from here on out, whether it's a book or whether it's a movie, it's really for the next 20, 30 years, because I will be dead probably. Who knows? I don't know if I'll live to be 100, but yeah.
No, it's not about the age, it's about the quality of life.
Absolutely. I'd rather go at a younger age and enjoy the maximum than to be hanging on by a thread in some hospital bed in my 90s. Trying to breathe.
I was like, tell my friends, man. I tell them I just want to have a fun death. Drive a motorcycle off a cliff, something like that.
Preferably not, but
probably not. But
I get what you're saying.
In the battlefield, fighting the wolves, something like that.
That's how people used to be, man. People didn't want to. They would go to war. They would go to battle. I don't know about all of that.
The Vikings, you had to die on the battlefield, otherwise you didn't get into heaven.
True. Yeah. Wow. I didn't thought of that. Yeah. We don't think like that anymore, do we?
People don't.
People don't. Yeah, man. Now you'll have this memorial page on Facebook. I remember one of the guys I worked with on the show. I kept sending him messages and he wouldn't respond. I'm like, man, what's up with this guy? So I go on his Facebook page and it's a memorial page. I'm like, oh my God, this guy died? Wow.
Crazy how you had to find out through Facebook, of all places.
Through Facebook. And then I messaged his daughter and all this stuff. And she's like, yeah, he really liked your show. He liked you. He spoke highly of you, blah, blah, blah. And it just crushed me, man. I felt so bad because we're so detached, I think, sometimes as individuals. We consider people friends, but then when they pass, we don't even know until you stumble on his Facebook page. No, man, we got to be more connected. Yeah. Got to be more connected. And I appreciate you taking the time to interview. And well, really, this is more of a conversation.
This was fun. Thank you, JB. This is great.